So there are a lot of eyes focused on the wrap-up of the Pacific Islands Forum today, and so who better to join us now than Peter's regular Thursday night expert. It's the foreign editor of the Australian newspaper, Greg Sheridan. Greg, it's great to have you joining me on Credlin. It was the first face-to-face meeting in 3 years, and was this latest step up from the US, albeit via video link. The Solomon Islands declared Australia is their partner of choice and a more unified approach from the Pacific. What did you make of how everything's unfolded today?
Well, Cory, first of all, apologies for my hoarse voice. I was screaming at State of Origin last night to no avail. Look, I think it's been a pretty good Pacific Islands Forum for Australia. I think the idea that we're now in the good books because we're doing more on climate change is just complete and absolute baloney. A lot of people have been putting the weights on Solomon Islands, including the Americans and the Japanese and everybody else. On the other hand, it's sweet that he and Albo had a hug. That's great. It's sweet that he said China will never have a base there. He said the very same thing before. I don't think it solves the problem. I mean, it's very good that he said it. It's terrific. Let's absolutely pocket the win. But I don't think you can trust Sogavare's word on anything. And you know, Xi Jinping promised us that the islands of the South China Sea would never be militarised too. But having said all that, it's been a good forum and, you know, the atmospherics are good. In the end, the Albanese government ends up in exactly the same position as the Morrison government. Pacific Islands Forum say they're not doing enough on climate change. They love us. They want our money, but they're also open to competing bids by outsiders.
Yes, it's a huge challenge, and it's not a partisan challenge. It's just merely international politics and diplomacy. But Greg, what do you make of the elephant in the room over the last couple of days? And it is China again, but the reports today, and in fact there was probably a lack of coverage, I should say, of the news that Australia's warships have been met by military activity from Beijing recently. This is a huge concern, isn't it?
Well, it sure is. They did the same thing apparently to an American destroyer, and the Americans are responding by sending a much bigger, tougher naval force to the same area. We can't do that because we don't have any military capabilities to talk of. You know, all the Morrison government's high rhetoric about China didn't produce any capabilities, and it's up to the Albanese government now to actually go ahead and buy us some warships and some submarines and all the rest of it. But yes, the Chinese are illegally challenging and harassing our ships and our planes in international waters and international airspace in the South China Sea and the East China Sea. This is in contravention of international law, in pursuit of utterly ridiculous territorial claims, which the Permanent Court of Arbitration said they had no basis for. And it just shows that although they're being nice to us at the diplomatic level, this is the reality of their hard power, and we need hard power to be able to answer it.
It's one of the great challenges, though, isn't it? Because if we did this to a Chinese military vessel, the Chinese would use it as an excuse to put Australia back in the sin bin for a state of origin parlance, Greg. But we can't win this battle, can we, without the military might of, say, the US?
That's true, Cory, but we could do infinitely more than we currently do. We spend nearly $50 billion a year on defence. China only spends $250 billion. So we could do vastly more than we do. This country is great at talking about strategy and doing nothing about it. We're spending billions of dollars on tanks, which we can never use in a maritime conflict. We're spending billions of dollars on heavy armour, which we can never use on a maritime conflict. We've spent 20 years doing nothing about submarines. We're going to do nothing about them for the next 20 years. Our frigates are old and undergunned. The new frigates we're getting are way behind time, and they're going to be massively undergunned compared to the Chinese. I mean, we need a government which should sack all the senior defence people, put in a new team, and pursue a strategy of asymmetric military capability which would hurt any aggressor, which would be based on missiles and drones and modern warships and arming our existing patrol vessels. We don't do any of that because The secret grammar of all Australian defence is we're just the same as the Afghan government. We believe the Americans will always look after us.
Yeah, and that I think is a reliance that perhaps we shouldn't have for the foreseeable future. What about this, Greg? At the last election, of course, one of the Labor people were christened the Manchurian candidate. That may be the case no more. This time it's Defence Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles. He's been in Washington, DC this week, full of mutual promises to boost defence, boost cooperation, and as we discussed before, increase Pacific support. This seems like a step in the right direction. Are you reading it the same way, Greg?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I never bought the nonsense about Marles being the Manchurian candidate. Marles is a very good person, completely patriotic, very serious about defence. I mean, there's nothing remotely improper about his contacts with Chinese diplomats. The challenge for Marles is simply this. Is he going to be captured and run by the defence bureaucracy like the last several defence ministers have been, so that we get no change to the antique and decrepit and impotent force structure which we've had since Robert Menzies' time? We've got the same defence force structure as we've had since Menzies, roughly the same number of ships and planes and all the rest of it. Is he going to be captured by them and stick with the nuclear subs? I'm in favour of the nuclear subs, but we're plainly not going to get them for decades, so we need something in the interim. Is he going to have the urgency to change defence culture and produce real capabilities in the next 3 to 5 years? I've got no doubt about his basic patriotism and his alignment with the US and all the rest of it. It's no hurdle for an Australian government to align itself with the US. All governments do that. That's great that they do it, but that's the easy bit. The hard bit is actually acquiring real capabilities ourselves, which would give an aggressor real pause.
Yeah, and you're quite right about successive ministers being unwilling or unable to stand up to defence. The proof is in the pudding, and it's a political graveyard for many ministerial representatives. But what about going back to America for a second? I mean, we're snuggling back up to them, if I can put it like that. But Joe Biden, he's the current occupant of the White House. He's barely there. He's off to a disastrous start the second he got off a plane recently. Have a look at this. Greg, this is embarrassing. I mean, we are reliant on the US. We've discussed that. But Joe Biden is not the deterrent that I think China needs to have them put back in their place. How big a risk is Joe Biden or the person occupying the White House right now? And do you think that needs to change in order to get some balance back into global affairs?
Well, Cory, I mean, the thrust of your question is obviously right, but mind you, I don't want it to change, because if it changes, the new person in charge is Kamala Harris. And, we'll be mourning Joe Biden if we end up with President Kamala Harris. Biden is a feeble president, and he's a guy long past his best. He's a decent human being, he's a centrist, and the people around him are perfectly competent. Lloyd Austin, Antony Blinken. They're not absolutely outstanding super heavyweights, but they're perfectly competent. But surely America can do better than Donald Trump or Joe Biden. And the question is Biden a low point from which America recovers under Ron DeSantis or some, more aggressive, more lively Democrat? Or is he in fact the last high point? Does the next president come from the isolationist left of the Democratic Party or the isolationist right of the Republican Party? I mean, one reason I'm such a boring monomaniac about getting our own defence capability is that while I think overall the Americans remain reliable and the alliance is tremendously beneficial for us, you have to say it's not an absolute given that the Americans are always going to provide the strategic guarantee that we've relied on in the past. And an intelligent nation would now be taking every action it could to become self-reliant, while at the same time pursuing closeness with the Americans, because at the end of the day, they're the only Americans we have.
Yeah, Greg Sheridan, words of wisdom there. Thanks so much for joining me on Credlin tonight. Really appreciate it.